Hello everyone, my name is Joanne Lockwood and I am your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series I have interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had the conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's S-E-E changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 65 with the title, Self-Forgiveness is Tough. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to welcome Liz Cashin. Liz describes herself as a mental well-being speaker, author, trainer, and coach. When I asked Liz to describe her superpower, she said compassion, because she has been through so much herself and is able to have compassion for other people, their suffering, not to judge or blame them for their actions they take, but trying to understand them much better. Hello, Liz. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. I am absolutely delighted to be here as your guest today. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, me too. Liz, tell me, self-forgiveness is tough. Why do you think that?
Well, where do we start? It's such a big conversation, and one that really has been a life journey for me. And I think self-forgiveness is something that so many of us actually could benefit from, but perhaps haven't yet found a way or learned how to forgive ourselves. And that potentially is because we're blaming ourselves for things that have happened in our past that maybe there is no blame for. And I'm saying that I sort of hesitated because that has been my journey. I blamed myself for many, many years. I felt a lot of shame, a lot of guilt following a really horrific accident that I was part of at my school when I was just 13 years of age. And I took part in my school sports day, as most 13-year-olds do. It's sort of that's that time of the year when, some people look forward to it, some people dread it. But I was actually really looking forward to it because I thought I was going to win a medal. And at that point in my life, I really craved recognition. I was a child who had a difficult home background. I had a mentally and emotionally abusive stepdad at home and was constantly being put down. And so one way that I really got recognition was through sports. And so I was really looking forward to the sports day. And that was so at odds then. By the end of the day, my friend was in hospital fighting for her life, and I felt completely responsible for the whole thing. I'd thrown the javelin in the javelin event, and the school had put my friend out on the field. She was 13 to mark the throw. And when I threw, for some reason, she was distracted. It hit her in the head. And 4 days later, she died in hospital from her injuries. It was as horrific as it sounds. It was a very, very difficult time in my life, and actually shaped and defined my whole life to come. I think something, it was almost like my life before that day and then my life after that day. It was so defining, and there was no trauma help back then. This was the 80s. People didn't even know about trauma, didn't even know about mental health. And so unbelievably, by today's standards, I didn't talk to anybody about what had happened. So I was struggling with this major trauma, and without anyone to process it with, I just blamed myself entirely and took all that responsibility. As far as I was concerned, the javelin left my hand and my friend was now dead. I couldn't take in anything else because I'd been there. And as a 13-year-old, as a child, we tend to blame ourselves for things anyway. And what I've learned that is in trauma, we tend to blame ourselves whether we're a child or an adult. So, and I also had those seeds of beliefs that had already formed with my stepdad that there was something wrong with me. And now I just thought that I was evil and I deserved to be punished. This is what I unconsciously created. And then went on to find many different ways to punish and abuse myself over decades to come. And so really, my journey has been one to find forgiveness for what happened, which, as I say, has been a lifelong journey. And it was only 5 years ago that I was actually diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So I've been living with that for over 30 years. And it was actually a relief because I'd had such mental turmoil during that time that I tried to cover up and hide and felt shame around that. I felt like, I was different to everyone else, that I should be able to pull myself together, that why did I keep spiraling into this sort of place of despair? I couldn't understand it. And then suddenly there was a valid reason why, and actually I was able to get some trauma-specific help. So I know that's a sort of a big introduction to what we're talking about today, but I just really wanted to set that context really about why self-forgiveness has been my journey.
I've just been sitting here listening to you, and I don't have a sensible thing to say now about that. It's just almost unfathomable to me listening to that story and that scenario and that random event, and to be able to come up with anything meaningful to say back. I've got some questions though. I mean, you say you blamed yourself, you saw yourself as evil, and that was a self-image. But were there people around you who you perceived were assigning blame? Do you feel that you were being held responsible in some way and you had to fight that? Or did you feel that people weren't absolving you enough? Or what was going on at the time?
It's a really good point. And, my friend's family, my friend who died, they never once blamed me, never from the get-go. Just incredible people. And I'd hate to think actually what would have happened if that had been different. So, but I couldn't understand why they were so forgiving, because I was thinking, but it was my fault. It didn't matter what anybody said to me. I had thrown the javelin and my friend was dead. And to me, it was as cut and dried as that as a 13-year-old. I was like, but you don't understand. But I have to say as well, I took my turn when I was told to. I didn't come out of the thrower's box. I did exactly as I was instructed to do. And it's only many, many years later, 5 years ago, in my trauma processing, that I really grasped that actually I had done exactly as I was instructed to do. I wasn't messing about. I wasn't doing anything other than taking part in my school sports day event. And the school had put 2 13-year-old girls out on the field to mark the most potentially dangerous event. And there was no sports teachers there. There was a history teacher and an English teacher overseeing the javelin event. And in the inquest, they were asked why that was. Oh, well, that's because we did it last year. There was no real grasping of the severity of the dangers that could happen. And so in the processing 5 years ago, it was a revelation to me. I felt quite emotional even thinking about it then, because I suddenly had this revelation. Actually, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just doing exactly as I was told to do. In fact, I'd had a right to be safe at school that day, as well, of course, as my friend. I had never really put myself in that equation before. I'd always thought about my friend and obviously how she'd had a right to be safe. I'd never put myself equally in that mix. And I think not having had help to process it, I was left with all that trauma in my system. And I was stuck in a 13-year-old's trauma perspective, because with PTSD, your mind is literally frozen in horror back where in that place. So it was almost like I had to unthaw that and really look at it from an adult's perspective and really question the validity of those beliefs that I'd created. So even back at the time when, people would say, but it wasn't your fault, it had nowhere to land in me. I was like, you weren't there. It was my fault. She's dead. That's, it's entirely my fault. I couldn't understand. I couldn't grasp, because I was only 13. And, we're trying to make sense of something that, like you say, has no sense. And I was desperately trying to find the why. Why did this happen? That's all my mind kept going. And the only why I could come up with was there must be something wrong with me. It was the only thing I could think of that made any sense. Well, it must be me then, if there's no other reason why. Accidents happen. Well, to a 13-year-old who's just been involved in something so traumatic, it's like, it was me. I was there. It's happened to me. And so therefore it must be me. There must be something wrong with me. And thank goodness we know more now, I think, that, we're able to give people the right help a lot sooner, so that these things really don't take hold in the way that they did for me, and really had such a destructive impact on my life for so long. And, the shame, I'm on a mission really to eradicate shame, because when we really understand what people are going through, there is never any shame. There's never any shame when you really understand the full picture. And, shame. So guilt is, I've done something wrong. And shame is, I am wrong. My identity, I am wrong. That's what shame is. And I just felt that I was evil, that I was completely wrong as a person. And that's very difficult then to work through. When it's your whole identity is that.
Because both guilt and shame, they're not productive feelings or emotions, are they? There's no positivity that can ever come from them.
No.
You've got to get to that point where you realize that you've got to move past those in order to, regardless of the circumstance. And you can't live in that time with shame and guilt. You have to move forward into what next. How do I resolve that? And that must have been tricky, because you said that you kind of got a before incident and after incident, and your life at that moment changed forever. So what sort of things happened at that time in terms of your involvement in sport, your school, your friends? What was the key thing you remember about being a significantly different day plus one, if you like?
That everybody was looking at me, but nobody was talking to me about it. That's the overriding thing. And so it just exacerbated my shame, because I thought everybody knows. It was in the national press, it was on the news, it was on the radio. Everybody knows this thing about me, and nobody was talking to me about it. I think people were too afraid to talk about it because they didn't know how to handle it. But I was told at school, the teachers are keeping an eye on you, but nobody was talking to me about it. And so, my friends didn't know how to talk about it. Since I've started to speak publicly, I've had friends from school reappear and say, we're so sorry. We had no idea at the time. We're so sorry we couldn't support you better, because they were children at the same time. None of us really knew how to handle what was going on. And I think people maybe thought if we just returned to normal life. And so for everybody else, it might have appeared normal. But for me, it was like, I felt like a walking zombie. I suppose that's the best way to describe it. And I suppose that's the other thing. I never felt like I was really in life after that. I felt like life was here, separated from me by like a glass. I was in a glass box and life was outside of it. And I would just pretend to be living, but actually inside felt anything but. I felt dead inside. I think that's what happened. It was like part of me died that day, and I just tried as best I could to try and pretend I was okay, because that's what I had to do, because there was no other option. I think there was no other option apart from I look back and I think how incredibly strong I was, and part of my sort of journey of recovery has been acknowledging that 13-year-old part of me and everything that she went through. And actually she did keep going, even though it, with very destructive consequences for me as a person, but she did find a way. She was resilient. She found a way to get up every day and keep going. And of course, my home life was still very difficult, very challenging, to the point where I actually left home when I was 17 and lived in a council flat while I did my exams. And again, I think, gosh, to find the strength for that when I still was holding all the trauma as well as all the stuff with my stepdad. And yet I found the strength to leave that toxic environment and make a stand for myself. And yeah, so there's always been this strength inside, and I think if it's in me, it's in everyone, I think, and we don't know we have it until we have to draw on it. And I think I was just thrust into that position and managed to find it. But I know it's not as easy as that, and I know sometimes in my life I haven't felt it, and I haven't wanted to be alive at some points in my life, because the pain can be so overwhelming and so consuming. It's very difficult to find any strength in that. But even in those moments, I just try to hang on to this too will pass. Those, just a glimmer of hope. Unfortunately, that has always got me through somehow.
So it took, I think you said it took 30 years of living with PTSD to finally explore what had gone on. So in that 30 years, did you kind of own this label of kind of killer or murderer or whatever strong words you want to do, and the shame, the guilt you had? Did you almost like self-identify as that? And then people around you, people maybe could try to get close to you, you felt the need to bring it out and put it on the table in front of you and own that and apologize for it all the time? Or was it something you kept secret?
It's a really good question. It was actually a mixture of those things. I think sometimes I just didn't want anyone to know. I was terrified that people would find out, because I did definitely own that label of murderer. It's hard for me to even think about that now, but that definitely was what was happening. But sometimes, if people would get close to me, then I would open up to them. But it was, I was always terrified then that I'd be rejected for it, which I never was. But it was that that self-rejection that I was holding inside. So I've never let anybody get really close to me. I've always sort of held relationships close, but not too close. I think, and some of that is mixed up with my stepdad as well. There's trauma, major trauma that I went through, and also relational trauma, and that is still a form of trauma. And I think so many of us have experienced trauma in many different ways, and I'm really glad that conversation is opening up now about actually what is trauma and all the different elements of that. So I also had the relational trauma aspect, so I found it very difficult to let anybody in to get anywhere really close to me.
So what was the epiphany or the trigger moment you went, I need to deal with this? What got you to that point where you asked for help? Or that, because that's what we're talking about here, is in terms of PTSD mental health, we want people to come away from this with that first step. How did you get to that first step?
I had gone for help over the years, but was misdiagnosed with depression. And so that didn't really get to what was really going on for me. But I would say, if anyone else is going through something similar, don't give up. Keep going back. Keep going back to ask for help again, even if you don't feel like you've made progress so far. Because I think that's the thing. Sometimes doctors don't diagnose in the correct way, and then we can't get the right treatment. So just be aware of that it took me a few times in order to get the right help. But I think the main thing was when I started to speak about it, and I know we've met through the Professional Speaking Association, and I really felt like I wanted to share my story because there's so many people struggling with their mental health, and we need more people to talk about it and to normalize it and destigmatize it. And so I felt a calling to do that. But what happened was I entered a speaking competition, thinking it was just 5 minutes to share my story. And that was a huge step for me. And what I hadn't anticipated was that I'd win that round of the speaking competition, which was incredible. But then I had to go to the national semi-finals and then the finals. And this was a massive thing for me, who'd just taken the courage to sort of speak for 5 minutes. And then suddenly it was, I was being called to really step up. And because I was sharing my story, and the really sort of pivotal moment of the story again and again and again, it was sort of re-triggering me all the time. And so, around the same time, somebody said, "Oh, have you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk?" So that's Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score. Just a seminal book on trauma. I highly recommend. And I read the first chapter about a soldier who had PTSD, and I cried. I felt so seen. I thought, oh my goodness, this is me. This is the way he talked about being in a glass box, and the disconnection, and the flashbacks and the nightmares, all of this stuff. And I was like, this is what I've been struggling with. And so I went back to my GP, which was a new GP, and asked him, could I have an assessment for PTSD? And a beautiful moment for me, but he apologized on behalf of the medical profession and said, I'm so sorry, nobody has thought to send you for this before. And actually that meant a lot to me. I know he wasn't responsible for the rest of the medical profession, but again, it was that compassion, really, that understanding of, oh my goodness, you've lived with this for such a long time. I'm so sorry nobody else has spotted it or been able to guide you to the right help. So it was because I felt that constant re-traumatization. That's what led me. I thought, I can't keep sharing my story and feeling this level of pain. That's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it hopefully to give hope to other people, not to keep hurting myself. And so that was really the trigger that made the difference.
They do say in our speaking profession that you speak from the scar, not from the wound, isn't it? So
Yeah.
we have to heal first before we're able to tell our story in an objective way. Otherwise, we're always reliving our trauma, and that's sometimes a mistake people make, isn't it?
And I completely agree with that. And I think, but in that competition, I spoke from my wound because I didn't realize the wound was there. So, I sort of did it unwittingly, and it led me to the right help. So for me, in a much bigger picture, it was really a really good step, even though it was very painful in my healing journey. But I absolutely agree. I needed to get that help so that I can now speak and not so I'm speaking now from the scar rather than from the wound. But initially I didn't even know that wound was there and what it was.
When you said you saw your new GP, and I think you said it was he immediately reacted and stepped up. I've been there, and it's so validating to have someone go, I hear you, let me do something, let me work with you. A medical professional going, I've got this. And I remember with my GP having a conversation about something completely different in a similar sort of way. And just that validation that, take the time, let's deal with this. I'm here for you. What can I do to help? Let me engage services and make sure this works for you. That is so powerful that one person takes that time to just be there and help and listen. So that must have been an incredible feeling.
It was. And I think that's something to share, isn't it, with people, that, sometimes other people might be struggling in our lives and we think we've got to know all this stuff, but actually just to say, I'm so sorry. I really hear you, how difficult it is. I see you. Just that, like you say, is incredibly validating and can make a huge difference. We don't have to make it right. We don't have to fix it. In fact, we can't. We're not medical professionals, most of us. But we can, and this is why I said at the beginning, about my compassion is my superpower, I think, because we're so quick to judge other people or label them or make assumptions about people. And if we can just sort of sit with them, be with them and say, I see you, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, that sounds really tough. That can be huge for that person. And like you say, for you and I have had a similar experience. And actually at school, when I was in my upper sixth, as it was then, I was trying to think year 13 as it is now. And I lived in this council flat. And so, I was having to take care of myself on top of everything else. But I remember this one teacher, Mrs. Nicholson, and she was my form teacher then. And sometimes I would be late for school. Sometimes I wouldn't turn up to school. And she would always have a word with me. How are you? She'd just check in. How are you doing? And don't worry, I've marked you into school. Or, she was just so kind. She didn't really do anything except show me that kindness. And for me, in all this sea of sort of craziness at that time and feeling so rejected by so many people, to have this one person who was saying, I'm looking out for you, I'm just checking you're okay, was huge for me at that point as well. So it's those kind moments throughout our lives, I think, can make such a difference, and we can be that for somebody else.
Yeah, I find when I do a lot of corporate lunch and learn type talking, and part of my talk is always a 20-minute Q&A afterwards, and ask me anything kind of session. And very regularly I get asked, if someone's facing bullying, discrimination, being disrespected, whatever it may be in workplace or society, what's my bit of advice? And I always start off by saying, remember, there's always someone who will listen. It's really important to realize you're not alone. And it may seem the hardest thing in the world to open up, but you find somebody, whether it's the Samaritans, whether it's your best friend, whether it's a colleague, whether it's someone in a coffee shop, whatever it may be, a stranger, there is always someone who will listen to you. And once you've been listened to, you share that. The problem doesn't become so internalized. You're able to sort of maybe actually just the act of speaking out loud sometimes allows you to offload that mental block. And I always think that's the most powerful thing, is just realizing that no matter what happens, there's always someone who will listen. They may not be able to fix you, as you pointed out there. You don't need fixing. Actually, I can fix myself if I'm allowed to explore my thoughts out loud. And I think you said you're a coach, and that's part of the secret of coaching, isn't it? Not to fix someone's problem, but to help that person unlock and explore themselves. So, yeah.
It's so true. And I think that listening thing is so key. It's part of what I teach in the programs, is such a key part, that non-judgmental listening. And actually our minds judge, that's what they do. But it's about, understanding that, parking it, and just keep showing up. And that's a skill that we can develop. And actually, it's hard for some of us. I put myself in this category because we may have tried to talk to our family, but the family is so loaded with all of their stuff as well. So you try and tell your story, and then they say, well, no, it wasn't like that. Or, well, no, blah, blah, and try and sort of say that your perspective isn't right, or your story isn't true, or when actually everybody's story is right and true for them. The truth is somewhere in the middle of it all, of course, but to actually hear somebody's truth, somebody's perspective, and just allow that, give that space. Whether you agree with it or not is something else, but to just allow it and to validate that that is true for them. Then that
it's victim splaining, almost, or whatever the equivalent is. It's kind of saying, it's almost saying, listen, you're wrong, and that's not going to fix anybody.
No, and I've had people say
it's
that.
about internalize. It's feel it. How do you feel? It's not going out with your right or wrong or logic. It's feeling, isn't it?
It is. It is. And I've had people say that to me in my life. That isn't what happened. That's not true. And it is true for me. That is exactly what happened. That is my experience. But we're so quick sometimes to deny other people's experiences. This could be in the workplace as well. No, that's not true. Well, actually give space, but you don't have to agree with it, but just give space for other people's opinions, and realize it is true for that person, rather than saying it's not, because then you've got a fight going on. If someone says to you, it's your truth, and they say it's not, well, you're going to want to defend yourself, aren't you? It is true. It is true for me. No, it's not. It is. It is. And so it's this losing battle, whereas you can just say, oh, I really hear that that's your perspective. I really hear that that's your truth.
Tell me more about that. Tell me why you believe that. Tell me more about it. Keep talking. Yeah, that's wow. Talking. I never thought that.
Yeah.
What gave you that perspective, or why did you think that? All those kind of things, isn't it?
Curiosity is key. I love that. I bring that into all my trainings. Be curious rather than judgmental. Be curious, because we don't know. We think we know, but actually when we think we know, we're not listening, and then we miss vital information.
Because we want to jump to the fix, don't we?
We do.
If you tell me your problem, I tell you you're wrong, and now you're fixed. You
Yeah.
see it through my perspective, and suddenly your trauma will go away. And that's not the way trauma works, is it? It's not linear or logical.
No, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I know, and it can just take us by surprise as well. Like, like I was saying, when I started to speak about my story, and then suddenly I was in all this trauma again, because I tried to put a lid on it so tightly. I wasn't expecting it to erupt like it did, because I didn't appreciate how much I was sitting on. So it can just take us by surprise as well. And I'm mindful as well of the opening statement about self-forgiveness. And I was just thought I might bring that back in again. Now we've sort of explored a little bit more, because when I had my trauma cognitive behavioral therapy, so that's specifically for PTSD around a trauma, and we started to unpick all those negative beliefs about being evil and all of that. And I thought my journey was self-forgiveness. I thought that's what I needed to do. And then realizing that actually I hadn't done anything wrong, that I'd done exactly, I was just following a teacher's instructions. I did nothing wrong on that level. It was like, and then I realized how much pain and suffering I had created towards myself as a result of believing that I'd done something wrong. That's what really got me up. Oh, the pain and suffering that I had caused myself because I had rejected myself for something that I had not done wrong in the first place. It was, and I think that's really, my heart sort of cracked open then to self-compassion. It was more, and compassion means to suffer with. And I suddenly was like, with this 13-year-old, like, I am so sorry for everything now that I've done to you as a result of believing that there was something wrong with you, believing that you were evil. All of this, it's heartbreaking, really, when I think about it. And it's about me, when I think about all that abuse I gave myself and punishment. I took a lot of drugs in my 20s. I was in very destructive relationships. I've always used food as a way to beat myself up. Every time I eat something, there's an internal dialogue, going on that's really negative. So all of this I'd done to myself. That was the hardest thing that I had to face. And so the self-forgiveness was tough, that whole journey. And actually then realizing it developed into self-compassion when I really understood I was just a actually innocent 13-year-old going to school, having a right to be safe and doing what she was told to do. And without the right help and support as a result of that, had created all of this negative narrative and destructive beliefs and abuse and punishment. That is the toughest thing I've had to face.
As you're talking there, my mind is tumbling around inside going, you've just switched the entire perspective of the episode title on me. I
Oh,
thought you had to forgive yourself for the event. And what you realized was there's nothing to forgive. That's the first thing I just picked up from that. What you had to forgive yourself is the shame, the guilt, or the
yes.
internal trauma, the self-imposed
Yes.
exile in your life.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what you had to apologize to yourself for believing it was your fault. All those kind of emotions going on. So self-forgiveness is tough. It's actually forgiving yourself for all that internalization.
Yeah.
You weren't to blame. There's no guilt. There's no shame. You were a victim in your own right as well. And you're not victim owning it. You're not owning that, but a victim. You're just apologize to yourself for not seeing clearly earlier. And that is wow. Yeah, that is. Whoa, yeah. Slam dunk, punchline right in the middle of the
Slam
episode.
dunk. Yeah,
Brilliant. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And
yeah.
there's actually a BBC Ideas short video on self-forgiveness that I'm in. It's coming out soon. Will be out when this podcast comes out. And that's exactly what we explore within that. Actually coming round to realize that it was the things I'd done to myself that have created the need to forgive myself. Yeah. And that's tough.
Am I right in
That is
thinking
tough.
that the PTSD will never go away. It just becomes manageable, submerged, an echo. It becomes fainter. It becomes less of a part of your life, but something that is still with you will be with you for a long time, just maybe not consciously all the time.
Some people completely recover. It's so broad. It's like, it depends. I was going to say it depends how long you've had it, but I don't think that's even true. I think it's so individual what happens. But I was told by the lady I did the trauma CBT, she said, I may always have it because I had it for so long and because it happened at such a key time in my brain's development. So 13 is that really key time when so many things in the brain. And she said, my brain will have developed in a different way to other people as a result of holding the trauma. And so, yeah, it's difficult, but, I do have episodes where I struggle, I really, where I really struggle still. And I've got so many tools that I use. I have awareness, so I don't beat myself up if I'm struggling. I just bring kindness and compassion to myself and reach out for professional support if I need it, talk to people, or do I need to take a break? All of these things I know now to do. Whereas in the past, I would just beat myself up for feeling bad, and that would just spiral into, something else and make it all a lot worse.
So 5 years on, approximately,
Yes.
since you
Yes.
had this epiphany that nothing was ever your fault and that you were blaming yourself unnecessarily, and this PTSD you worked through with some, as you say, some CBT and some coping mechanisms and some healing mechanisms. How did you get into what you're doing now then? Was that just a natural evolution, or it was a conscious decision? I'm going to help other people. Was it, what was the spark?
It felt like a calling. Some people might not understand that, but for me, it just felt like I'd been through so much in this life that, and as we talked about in the beginning, it's senseless. What I went through really was senseless, but there is some good that can come out of it. This was my sort of calling, I suppose, was, I don't want anyone else to have to go through what I went through and struggle like I did and feel that shame in silence because they're too afraid to speak up for what, the consequences might be to that. So I've really felt like I wanted to share my story more publicly so that other people would hear me and think, oh, that's me, or I've been going through that, or I recognize myself there, or if it's somebody in the family, and actually hopefully encourage people to get help, to get the right help, and to get it sooner, and to know there is no shame around that. So I think it was that I felt this real motivation to write a book about my story. So that was part of it. And then it was really interesting because I wrote a lot of it, and it's called This Is Me. So I wrote a lot of the book. And then it was like I couldn't work out how to finish the ending. This was about 10 years ago. I wrote a lot of it. And so then I just left it. And then when I got the PTSD diagnosis, I thought, this is why I couldn't finish the book, because actually the story, this is a key part. And so I went back and completed it with the PTSD lens. And of course, that everything then made a lot more sense. And I think this is it. There's so much work people do around mindset, and I teach mental health awareness and first aid for mental health. All those trainings I deliver, and there's an evolution of that, which is about trauma, and it's an ever evolving conversation. And as it evolves professionally, I'm also evolving personally, so it gives me extra insight. Trauma is in the body. So it's great to do, and it's fantastic to do all the mental health awareness stuff because it's a good stepping stone. We all need to be aware, but I just want to also let people know if you're trying to work on your mindset and that isn't working, you're still feeling bad. You may have trauma, and trauma is also in the body. It's in our nervous systems. And unless we know this and we help ourselves with that specifically as well. We're still going to hold it in our body, and therefore we're never going to fully feel right. And if you're anything like me, you'll just use that then as something to beat yourself up about, because I kept thinking, why am I not feeling better? Why do I keep spiraling? Because trauma is held in our mind and body, and so we need to understand that more. And so that's something now I'm more passionate again about, raising awareness and taking more trainings into the corporate space so people can become trauma informed in organizations.
So this occurred 35 years ago, and as you said yourself, there was very little awareness of broken mental health,
Yeah.
of trauma, PTSD. These kind of words just weren't in the vocabulary in the 80s, were they?
No.
So the world's moved on. You said the world moved on 5 years ago. So where we are today, where do people go? I'm sure when you're internalizing shame and guilt or all the other things going on in your life, speaking those words out loud is one of the biggest fears we must have, a bit of being further judged or having our shame reinforced. How do people step over that step, if you like?
Yeah, and I'd say be gentle with yourself, definitely. And as we've talked about, it has to be a safe space, because you quite rightly say, if you then go and talk to someone who is judgmental, who doesn't understand, it might be in your family, it might be someone else, and then the reaction then is a negative one, or pull yourself together, very unhelpful things that people say with good intent, it can create more harm. So I would say, if in the workplace you have your mental health first aiders, that is a confidential peer support. You could go and have a chat with them. If you get on well with your manager, for example, at work, and you think they are kind and compassionate, or a colleague, I think that kind and compassionate, if you know anybody that you feel has those qualities, that is a good place to start to speak. If you don't have anyone in your life like that, and if you don't, I'm really, really sorry about that, because I think everybody deserves to have people like that in your life. Then you can go and talk to your GP. As I said, I've had different experiences with GPs. So if you don't at first get a kind response, maybe talk to a different GP, but don't give up. That's the one thing I would say. Keep going. It's taken me a few tries over the years, and it takes courage. As you say, it can take real courage to talk about these things. We've held so much shame and guilt around for so long, but you are worth it. There is light at the end of the tunnel. If you can take anything from my story, it's don't give up. Keep going till you get the right help and the right diagnosis and the right treatment. But just have the courage to speak up to somebody. If you want to message me, if you want to chat to me, please do that. If you want me to be a first step for you. You can also, in your local area, there's IAPT, Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, where you can just go without a referral from your GP and talk to somebody there. So there are different ways. There are private therapists that you can pay if you can afford that. So Mind is a good, Mind, the mental health charity. So there are mental health charities that also have helplines. I would say try something, and hopefully if it works, then carry on with that. If it doesn't, try something else, but just keep trying, because living with shame, living with mental turmoil, that is the shame. It's like me with the self-forgiveness. The real shame around that is that I blamed myself for so long. It's not shame associated with the actual accident itself. So if you are struggling with your mental health, get help, because the sooner you can get help, the better for you. The better for you to realize there is nothing to be ashamed of, that there is nothing wrong with you. If you're struggling, there is nothing wrong with you. You are a human being. We all have a gamut of emotions. We fluctuate with our mental health. Some of us will have mental illness all our lives. Some of us will have episodes. Some of us will have poor mental health sometimes, but we're all like that. We're all human. We've got to really destigmatize this conversation so that it's normal to talk about it if we're struggling, because we all struggle sometimes. That's the thing. I used to think everyone else had it sorted except me, and now I realize that's couldn't be further from the truth. I think most people struggle or are struggling, especially through the last few years. hasn't escaped many of us, I don't think. So just know that you are not alone. You are not the only one, and there is nothing to be ashamed of.
One of the some of the positives out of the COVID era has been this awareness of well-being, mental health, because we're all in a different boat, same river, sort of thing. Managers, leaders were all experiencing the same trauma as everybody else in different ways. So for the first time in our society, we've all been knocked and rocked by a similar traumatic event. And I think there's been a huge, great awareness. And I look at some of the companies that have done some fantastic stuff over the last few years. And well-being, employee well-being, mental health first aid, signposting, check-ins, how are you? It's okay not to be okay. We're now talking about this in the workplace more than we ever did. And I think there's a lot more signposting. Employee assistance programs are now not seen as a shameful kind of, I don't need that, I don't need help. And we're starting to talk about male suicide, which is still the biggest killer of men under the age of 50, I believe, or something.
Yeah.
People know it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to cry. It's okay to not know. And that's the message we want to try and get across to people, isn't it?
It really is. And, that statistic shocks me every time I hear it, even though I say it a lot, that suicide is the biggest killer in men under 50. But when I was growing up, the culture was big boys don't cry, man up, your wuss, all of these really derogatory terms. And so we sort of trained men not to show their emotions. And now we expect them to be emotionally literate as adults. And there's how much shame that so many men are, and it's a weakness perceived. They've got to overcome all of that, and I can't even imagine how difficult a hurdle that is, as well as just feeling the mental health issue in itself. And so, but the more conversations we have, and actually, I'll just share this. It was quite profound for me. I did a mental health awareness training on a building site. And it was men at the end of a day. It was a hot summer's day. We were in a porter cabin. They just wanted to go home. I thought, oh my gosh, tough crowd. I walked in and they said, we want to go home. And I was like, oh, okay. 2 of them were on the floor. There wasn't enough chairs, So I thought, okay, just keep it upbeat, get through it, and then they can go. And some of them, English wasn't first language, so there was some side chats as I was talking, and I just thought, oh my gosh, they just hate it. They can't wait to go. And then feedback form at the end, they all diligently filled them out, and then they left, and they were in better moods, thankfully, by the time they left. And then I started reading these. I was very emotional. They'd all given it 10 out of 10. Really said how much it was needed, how much it had helped them. But one of them just said, trainings like this can help men like me not to suffer in silence. And I thought, it really changed something for me. This was a few years ago when I just first started delivering these trainings. Not to assume, or they still had to carry on the bravado to each other and I want to go home. But actually, they soaked it all in. They took it all in. They really needed it. They appreciated it. And that statement, I just thought, oh my goodness, of course they need the support, and of course they want it. Nobody wants to struggle and suffer in silence. So that was a real motivating driver for me at that point as well, and never to make those kind of assumptions. But also how hard it is for men, because they felt that they couldn't say that in the group, that they had to keep, the bravado up during the session.
In the last 5 years, I think I know 2 men who've taken their life. One recently, a childhood school friend. No one knows why. Absolutely no one knows why. At the age of 58, his wife came home and found him hanged himself in the back garden on a pergola in Australia. No notes, no nothing. Happy, in love, family, massive, everything going. No note, nothing. And another more distant friend, about 5 years ago, was going through some trauma financially in his business. He couldn't pay the wages. He had the bank foreclosing on him. All this pressure. And he just turned up at the office on a Monday morning, got in there early, and hanged himself in his office, and then was found by his PA or office manager.
Oh,
And the sad thing about that last story is that all of the problems that were going on in that business at the time, the financial troubles, the people who were rallied around to support his wife fixed them all in a few days. Phone call to the bank, phone call, conversation with the staff, phone calls to suppliers. Everybody was put on hold. Everybody had a conversation. Everybody gave time. And you think all that friend needed to do was just say, help, help. The same people who end up helping after they took their life could have helped beforehand. And that's what shame does, isn't it? That's what shame does. That fear of being judged, that fear of being weak. And one thing I've learned over the last 5 years since I gender transitioned is that weakness is actually a strength. Being vulnerable is a strength. Saying I can't or I need help is a strength. And I think, and I'm getting quite emotional. I'm almost quite tearful now talking about this. That's what we need to educate our young adults, our children, that we don't need to be unwavering. We need to be able to bend and flex and deal with our emotions.
I hear you. I hear you. Vulnerability is such a strength, and that can change the world actually. And I think it's these conversations normalizing the fact that we all struggle from time to time. You know, we're all human. We're all human beings. We all make mistakes sometimes. It's like we're in this perfectionist society, you know, all these images that get photoshopped, and we're all going for some perfectionist ideal that's an illusion anyway. You know, all of this is saying like we're not okay as we are. We have to be this other thing. And I think this is the journey, is accepting ourselves exactly as we are, warts and all. You know, we all have everything. We're all human beings. We mess up sometimes, we get it right sometimes. But let's stop judging ourselves. Let's stop criticizing each other. Let's stop blaming each other. Let's have some understanding, some kindness, some acceptance. And then we've got a real chance of these statistics, the dial changing massively, because we all realize, oh, actually, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm human. I'm just going through a really difficult patch. I need some help. Let me ask someone for help. Help is here. You know, we can do that. We can be that society, but we all have to make that personal change. And I think that is really one of the beautiful things to come out of my sort of horrific journey, I think, is it's made me a better human being at the end of it, because I, you know, really don't judge other people. I may get angry sometimes, but I think I don't know their story. You know, I'm able to drop that judgment. And, you know, we all get triggered. We've all got this stuff going on inside. We get triggered by each other. Unless we become aware of that and own it, we're just going to keep projecting our stuff onto other people and blaming them for it. I know this happens a lot in offices, particularly in the manager dynamic. You know, that can be a lot of those triggers and projections going on. But again, it's just become aware of that. Have some training, get some more awareness on how to have those conversations and how to be a more compassionate leader. All of these things are available to us. So you can see I'm passionate about it. But I think because otherwise we're just going to keep having wars internally and externally. We're just going to keep perpetuating this feeling of not enough, this shame, the guilt that so many of us are carrying around. And it's totally unnecessary.
But we both know that by sitting and having this conversation, just saying to people, ask for help, speak about it, we know that is a massive barrier. We know that just by saying it isn't going to make someone do it. So what I would always want to encourage people to do is, if you are a leader, you are a manager, you're a friend, whatever it may be, give people the time to be heard, to listen to people. They may not say they're broken. They may not say they've got some issues, but that you may be able to detect an element where they need some help, and then just give them more time and say, how are you? Are you okay? You really okay? You know, do you want to get a coffee? Do you want to sit down and talk about it? Is there anything I could do to help? Can I make a problem go away for you? Can I solve an unsolvable problem? And just not trying to fix them, but about listening, about allowing someone to just unpack it. And that's what I think leaders need to do in organizations is make sure you give people time and say, how's it going? You okay? Anything you want to just share? But not in a leader employee sort of way, in a kind of a friend, a buddy, a mentoring sort of way. And that's the challenge, because the power dynamic can stop people opening up as well, can't it?
Absolutely. And I know sometimes as well, the challenges, a manager will say, how are you? How are you really? And the person will say, no, I'm fine, even if it's apparent they're not. So I always encourage managers to say, oh, that's great, but just know I'm always here if you do want to chat. And never to take it personally, because we don't know what's going on for that person, what they've got going on in their lives, how terrified they are about speaking. But we might have planted a seed by saying, how are you really? They might come back to us, they might go to someone else, but just sort of leaving that door open. And also, I think it's so important that we also find a way to give leaders that space so that they can talk about their challenges, their mental health issues, because they're holding so much. And then they're holding the team and having these great check-ins. But if they're really struggling, then that is going to translate into the team also. So it's so important that we find ways to support leaders and managers and give them the space to be able to talk about their challenges too.
Yeah, I think we both probably refer to that as emotional intelligence, isn't it? It's about understanding yourself, your regulation, your compassion, your empathy, building relationships, picking up on body language cues, all those kind of things. And that we don't often promote leaders based on those emotional intelligence skills. And I think that's the next generation leader. We need to breed and train and create leaders who are in touch with their feelings, in touch with others, not just great technicians or got a big stick and shout loud. That's not the kind of leader we need now. We need nurturers and coaches and mentors in our leaders who can pick up on those body language cues.
Definitely. And of course, leaders, managers, they're coming from their own backgrounds. If we're not taught about this stuff in school, it's all, we're all got it all back to front, but how to create, empowering relationships, how to really listen. What can we say? I mean, there's specific ways we can, you and I know if you ask closed questions, you're going to get closed answers, and it's going to be very stilted, even simple things like that. But how to hold a space, a non-judgmental space. What questions can you ask someone? This is often why people don't want to feel like they're being intrusive about someone's mental health. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to, they don't know what is the right thing to say. These are all the fears that managers often tell me when I'm delivering the trainings. And so it stops them from saying anything because they're so terrified they're going to get it wrong and make the relationship worse. But there's some really simple things that actually, can make it so much better, and actually taking the lead of the person who's talking, giving them some space to talk. All those simple things, but can make a profound difference in those relationships. So it can be taught. So if you're a manager, leader who is struggling, just know that, there are ways that you can develop those skills. And it won't take too much to do that.
No, not only can it be taught, it can also be learnt.
It can be learned.
And
Yes. Yeah.
I started this podcast off as I showed you with a blank sheet of paper, and I had heard some of your story before. We've had conversations in the past, but I was immensely conscious of the fact that I didn't want to open a wound, push you into a place where there's some trauma came out. So I was being very active in my listening and my emotional intelligence, trying to judge whether the conversation we were having was a good conversation, going in the right place. What the questions that were popping into my head, I realized they were for my own morbid curiosity. That they weren't for your benefit; they were for my benefit. I thought, hang on a minute, no, I don't need to go there. That's not relevant to your story. It's relevant to my morbid curiosity here. So I was consciously thinking about what is a good question, what is a good train of thought, what isn't appropriate to go into, what may open a wound. And I think if we all have that when we're having these conversations, it's about not being selfish with your curiosity, isn't it? I don't need to know. I want to help you explore what you're thinking, not what I want to know.
That is so powerful. And I think, again, if we're normalizing that, we've all got a morbid curiosity. So don't beat yourself up. If you find someone is talking to you and you think, oh, because, we watch the news, it's all morbid curiosity, isn't it? We're telling us all these things. It's how everything is sensationalized so much of the time. So just notice that if it is happening like you did so beautifully, and then think, okay, what is going to be the best thing to help this person. And so asking the person, so what do you need? How do you feel about that? What is a good next step that you can take here? How can I support you here? What do you need from me? It's all about the other person. And that was so beautifully put by you, Joe. And it's so important. But just to know that is exactly what will happen. We'll want to know, like, oh, tell me more about that, because that's the way we've been conditioned, really. But that's okay. You just notice that, and then come back to the other person and focus on them and how you can help them.
Fantastic. Well, we're up to the hour. We spent 15, 20 minutes in the green room beforehand. I could talk to you all day, and I've got lots of morbid curiosity in my head that I need to go and box off somewhere. But no, it's been absolutely amazing. We've got some great takeaways there for leaders and managers in business. And if you're listening and you are going through any sort of trauma yourself, then we're sending out virtual hugs and vibes to your way. Yeah, there's always someone out there who's listening. Liz, how do people get hold of you? Tell us about your book, tell us about your website, tell us about your coaching programs.
I've got an unusual name which goes in my favor, so all of the domains are easy to find me. So it's Liz, L-I-S, slightly unusual, lizcashin.com. All of the LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all the usuals is at Liz Cashin. So really easy to find me. My book is available on Amazon, Goodreads. It's called This Is Me, My Journey to Mental Wellbeing. Won an award when it first came out, and it really outlines my journey right from a child and how I created those destructive beliefs about myself, how I interpreted the world and made my identity, and then how as an adult I have recreated that. I've recreated myself like the bionic woman, recreated that mentally, recreated my identity. And there's lots of really good information there that can support you if you are on your journey to mental well-being yourself. There's stuff about trauma in there. There's stuff about mind, body, and spirit, actually, along my whole holistic journey to where I am today. I've got a TEDx talk, which is Mental Health Awakening, Suffering is Surmountable. So again, I talk about my journey there. If that's something you want to check it out, if you like it, if you give it a like, if you comment, it's all appreciated. And as I say, the BBC Ideas video, it's a short video on self-forgiveness. So if you've been interested in that topic today, then please follow up on that. But if you are a manager and leader, I do run lots of courses around how to have better conversations around mental well-being, mental health awareness, first aid for mental health qualification, and also becoming more trauma informed. So you can check all that on my website, and I'd love to hear from you.
Liz, amazing, awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a fantastic hour. Yeah, thank you. And a huge thank you to you, the listener, for tuning in, listening to the end. Please do subscribe if you're not already. Keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast at BITES. Tell your friends and tell your colleagues. Please share. I have a number of also more amazing guests. No, they can't be more amazing. I've got numbers of other guests coming up. I'm sure you'll be equally inspired by them over the next few weeks, months, and hopefully years. And remember, if you'd like to be a guest yourself, maybe you've got a story, maybe you've got a passion you want to share, please let me know. And of course, if you've got any feedback, suggestions, please email me at joe.lockwood@cjandchapman.co.uk. Let me know how we can improve future shows or content you'd like to hear. So my name is Joanne Lockwood. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.